Good evening, DCPS families and the public. Welcome to our Reopen Strong Town Hall for the evening. We appreciate you joining us and learning more about how we're thinking and planning for the 2021 school year. We hope that everyone is having an enjoyable summer. I appreciate the weather. We had some warm days and now it's shifted, and we hope everyone is safe and is doing their part to ensure that we can, in fact, at some point, continue to support our students either in school or at home the best way possible. And to do that, we asked you to give us your feedback and your input. And we're pleased that we had over 17,000 respondents either in surveys or in focus groups or in other ways. We had an opportunity to hear from you about a safe return for every student in DCPS. When we think about what you said to us, there are three themes that I want to lift up today that we heard loudly and clearly. And the first is we need to prioritize safety for students and staff. And we will do that. DCPS is planning for very robust health and safety protocols to ensure that we are providing protective equipment for students and staff, that we have appropriate social distancing in schools, and also ensure that we modify operations to promote safety. We also know that maximizing learning in school and at home is paramount. We heard from families that there's a need to ensure as much as possible we have in-person instruction. We know that the optimal learning experience is when students and staff get to interact in person. But we also know that many of our young people have learned well and acquired a lot of knowledge in our learning at home posture and interested in how we can build upon what we learned in the spring. And then finally, we also heard that there's a need to continue to prioritize equity for all of our students. That for every student that may look different, and that we need to ensure that there's equal access for resources and supports for our students to learn in school or to learn at home. And so we are committed to these three guiding principles for our students, families, and staff as we're thinking about reopening strong. And again, we mentioned reopen strong. That means a safe return to learning for every student. So many of you have already given me your feedback, and there are a couple questions that we've gotten that I just want to address today before we get started. So some have asked if you know what DCPS is going to do for the 2021 school year, go ahead and tell us. Well, I'm here to tell you today, we don't actually know what the plans will be because we're still monitoring the feasibility of providing the hybrid option of in-person instruction. And the reason being is we continue to lean on DC Health to make that decision and determination of whether or not we can actually have in-person instruction. DC Health is continuing to monitor conditions in the district and the community spread of COVID-19 in DC. I also heard from families that there's fatigue with learning at home, and families are wanting to have the ability to have in-person instruction. But we've also heard from families that have asked us to prioritize safety and to only have in-person instruction when we know that we can ensure safety for students and staff. We'll continue to balance those perspectives, understanding that our goal is to ensure that we can provide safe, equitable learning for all of our students across DCPS and all 8 wards. And to share more about how we will accomplish that, we have a team of individuals on the DCPS Central Service team that will provide greater detail for you today. You'll get to hear from our Officer for Communication Engagement, Ms. Bernie. She'll be facilitating the discussions today and also providing you additional context on our engagement period and what we heard from you. Then you'll have the opportunity to hear from 3 of our chiefs. You'll get to hear from operations, you get to hear from teaching and learning, and also data systems and strategy. We talk about data system and strategy, we'll have a more keen focus there on technology. And I know many of you have asked questions about access to technology in a learning at home or hybrid posture. So with that, I'll turn it over now to Ms. Bernie, who will share a little bit more about our engagement efforts and also introduce our chiefs that will be presenting for you this evening. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chancellor. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Shanita Burney. I'm the Communications and Engagement Officer, which means that I'm responsible for our teams that lead our press and media, strategic and operations comms, and in addition to the district's family and community engagement strategy. Before we get started, if you'll indulge me for just a second, I want to acknowledge that these are incredibly scary times. The impact that this pandemic has had on our families, our friends, the belief in our country, our mental health, so many other areas is just inexplicable. But no matter how we deal with this on an individual level, the protection we want our children to have prevails above everything else. And so myself and others that you'll hear from today, including Chancellor, have school-age children, share many of the same fears and questions and concerns you have. We are being asked to make the same choices as many of you. That choice is very individual, and we greatly respect the ability to make that choice as a family. We know it's hard to trust us. We know that no matter our intent, that our actions don't always showcase us in a way that lends itself to public trust and transparency. I assure you that your emails, your calls, your outreach have not fallen on deaf ears. We hear you. We're working to be better for my child, for your child, and for all of our children. So thanks for allowing me the space to share that. Let's jump in. So as we start our conversation today, I want to share a little bit more about how we'll do the Q&A, the question and answer today. During town halls like this, we get thousands of questions and comments. They come in like rapid fire. And we have about 5 or 6 folks on our back end whose only responsibility during this town hall is to cull through, find themes, lift those questions up for panelists to respond to. Many of these questions get answered directly to the individual who wrote them, and then we take others and pull out trends and themes and share those back out with you following the town hall. Today will be similar. We absolutely will not get to every question this evening, but we will do our best to push forward any of those that are being frequently asked and leave some time after each presenter speaks to answer a few specific questions you have about what they shared. Your feedback is so incredibly important to us, and we want to remind you of the feedback that we heard from community members, families, and staff this summer. So recognizing also that some of you may feel differently today than when you took this survey. It could have changed drastically at this point. But I want to share with you 3 main takeaways from that point in time. So one of the first, and you'll see this on the slide, one of the first takeaways was that students and families preferred scenarios where students had the option to attend school each week rather than alternating weeks. And then secondly, there is interest between 20 and 25% in each stakeholder group in virtual only. So for high school students and students in Ward 7 and 8, it's important to note that those rates were closer to 30%, according to the family survey that we partnered with the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Education. And then lastly, in June, between 25 and 30% of staff and families were just undecided about next year. And so this feedback has been combed over over and over and over, and frames our 3 values that we continue to share with you in a number of different ways, including prioritizing safety, maximizing learning opportunities, and promoting equity of access. If we can go to the next slide. Before I turn it over to Patrick to talk about health and safety, I want to recognize all of the stakeholders who have been engaging with us over this planning process. The first being, of course, our families and community leaders. Those include, hopefully, some of you that are on this call now, focus groups that we've had with targeted groups of DCPS families, presenting at some of our ward-based ed council meetings, and a citywide survey, just to name a few. Secondly, we utilized our DCPS councils and advisory boards, and they include chancellors and other senior leaders, parent advisory boards, as well as staff and student advisory boards, early childhood parent policy councils, to name a couple. And then finally, our internal stakeholders that include staff, teachers, school leaders, and students. And so, given that, just wanted to ground us in sort of those initial thoughts. I'm going to shift over to Patrick Davis, our Chief Operating Officer, to share more around how we're thinking about safety and operations with our instructional models. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Patrick.
Great, thanks, Janita. And thank you all for joining. Just to segue off Janita's last slide there. Thanks for joining, and also thanks for all of the emails and calls over the past few weeks and months. I've been able to talk to a lot of you. Obviously, I can't see you right now, but I trust that a lot of folks that have reached out are on the line, and all of the information we've received from you all and other school districts and health agencies has really been informative and really helped us put together an operational plan to support a safe return. So I'm going to walk through a few slides here today, but I want to start by saying, we're not health experts here at DCPS. We're an education agency. So everything that we're outlining here in the few slides and all the guidance we've given out to schools is really grounded and based on health expertise and guidance from our partners at DC Health, the CDC, OSSI, and others. I view our job as really trying to operationalize all of that health data that, quite frankly, came in rapidly, and it was quite a fluid process, but we've had a really constant line of communication with our partners at the health agencies. And I'm really happy to share that yesterday we released to school leaders some draft guidance to operationalize that health planning that our partners have come up with. So on the slide here, I won't go through these in detail here. We'll touch on these as we go, but we've outlined 10 different commitments to you all, to our staff and students for what a safe return looks like, and we'll go through these on the subsequent slides. So why don't we just jump to the next one, and we'll touch on each of these as we go. The first thing I think folks have probably heard at this point, and based on some of the conversations the Chancellor and the Mayor have had at press conferences, but based on health guidance, one of the key things that we're planning to do if and when we come back for in-person instruction is really limiting the class sizes. So I think everyone on the call probably knows that a traditional classroom typically has 24 to 25 students in them. Given the guidance from DC Health and other health agencies, we're minimizing that class cap to no more than 12 people in a traditional classroom. That includes a teacher. We do have the ability to go up to a 13th staff member for things like push-in instruction, or if the principal needs to go in and observe. We do have the flexibility with DC Health to introduce a 13th person, but from a baseline standpoint, all of our planning and modeling is based on 12 students per room. There are some smaller classes for things like special ed and some of our early childhood classrooms, but the traditional gen ed classroom, we are capped at 12 people per room on a full-time basis. We'll touch a little bit later in the slides on what that means for room setup and things like that, but I want to make sure that's sort of a key fundamental thing that's going to drive some of the scheduled conversations that Corey will touch on. But this is sort of a guiding principle from us based on health guidance to limit the amount of students per room. So if you want to go to the next slide, Sarah. The other thing we're committing to doing is really changing what our routines look like and what our safety routines are as kids enter the building, as staff enter the building, and then also while students or staff are in the building. First and foremost, we're going to require all employees and students to wear a mask, and we will be providing all of those masks with partnership of our city partners at the Mayor's office. We've gone through a significant exercise to go through the procurement process, and we will be providing daily masks to students and staff, and we'll obviously have extra on hand if folks need, but that is not something that schools will have to budget for. It's something we're handling centrally. So every staff member and every student will receive a new disposable mask. We are going to make special accommodations, so we're going to buy smaller masks for our youngest students. We're also purchasing communicator masks for students that may need to read lips. So if there's any special circumstances, we're trying to make sure we're still providing PPE, but also meeting all the educational needs of our students. I think following just general guidance that everyone should be following. We're going to be increasing hand washing routines throughout the day, so there will be scheduled and planned breaks throughout the day so that students and staff will have the ability to wash hands on a regular basis. Additionally, providing sanitizer throughout our buildings, but based on the health guidance, there's nothing actually better than a proper hand washing. So we're going to be intentional about scheduling that with our schools so that students and staff have access to proper hand washing. And I've touched on this a little bit, but building entry will look drastically different. I think the most obvious thing I can say is that schools are going to look very different if we come back from in-person instruction, and that's going to start with entry. And there's going to be lots of new steps, which I'll touch on a little bit, but one of the key things is that, as I mentioned early on, everyone's going to be required to wear PPE as they enter, and we're really going to limit entrance and visitors into our buildings. If you want to go to the next slide. Another key element that we're going to be focusing on is making sure that our buildings and classrooms, corridors, any sort of area in the building is thoroughly clean. So we're going to be working with our custodial teams to do enhanced cleaning every day. So that means we're going to be cleaning all high-touch surfaces. So think of doorknobs, handlebars, sinks, anywhere, buttons, anywhere that a kid or a student or a staff member can touch. We'll be working and disinfecting those daily. We're also going to be doing a deep cleaning weekly. That'll be without staff in the building. So as you'll see in the schedule, we have a dedicated day that'll focus on cleaning, making sure that we deep clean all of our buildings. We're also working with our partners at DGS on HVAC improvements. So that first starts with making sure all of our HVAC systems are working properly. But also we've been working and understanding ASHRAE guidance, which is an advisory group on what healthy buildings should look like. And there's some key fundamental improvements that we want to make, which really boil down to increased fresh air ventilation. So many of our schools have direct outdoor air systems. We're going to be changing some of the settings to increase ventilation, but also increasing filter replacements to align with the ASHRAE recommendations, and also making special accommodations for schools that may not have fresh air systems, things like HEPA filters and things like that, to make sure that our air is as clean as possible. And then additionally, we're also working with DGS to make sure we're prioritizing all plumbing related work orders, to making sure all of our bathrooms are working properly, all hot water sources are working properly, all water sources, so we can actually do the hand washing protocols that I mentioned on the previous slide. If you want to jump to the next one. Great. So I mentioned limiting the number of kids per class, but initial thing is we're actually going to limit the amount of times students transition throughout the day. So one of the key principles that we're going from, based on guidance from DC Health and others, is that we really want to try to limit the mixing of cohorts. So that group of 12 students will really be that group's really community for that throughout the entire school year. They're going to do a whole lot of things together, and they're going to remain as a group throughout the day and really try to minimize the amount of times that they mix with other cohorts, which again leads to minimizing the amount of transitions that happen throughout the school day. So this essentially boils down to the extent possible, the students will actually remain in their classroom for the majority of the day with limited transitions. So things like specials, so art, music, science, and typical areas where students would transition and go from classroom to classroom. That's actually not really going to occur next school year as we're thinking about it. Those things will push into the classroom. There will be still times where students are going to leave their classroom. We do want to encourage outdoor exploration and outdoor learning and outdoor activities. So students will still be able to leave, but it'll be in a very orderly, scheduled way. And whenever they leave the classroom, they're going to remain with that small cohort, again, to limit the mixing of student populations. Next slide. So I mentioned there's going to be a limited number of kids in the classroom, and one of the reasons we're doing that is so we can actually enforce and put in place 6-foot guidelines. So like all of you are following in your normal day activities, we want to make sure that our students and staff are following the same protocols. So we'll be setting up classrooms in a way that desks and learning centers will be 6 feet apart and actually facing in the same direction. That's a key guidance from DC Health. A lot of our classrooms to date are, set up in very different ways, where often students are facing each other or sitting in circles. But based on the health guidance, we're going to move back to sort of the traditional style of learning that we all probably went to school in, where desks are facing the front of the classroom, but again, 6 feet apart. Communal spaces will be limited, and as I mentioned, they're going to be used infrequently, but they're going to be used again with that cohort grouping with mind, and they're going to be staggered and scheduled. This is going to be very new for our students and staff. So we're working throughout the building on signage and any floor tapes and notifications to help with these new processes. So things like making markings in the floor to show where 6 feet is. So we'll mark in the classroom how to line up and exit or how to get into the building. We're going to reinforce and hopefully over communicates all of these new safety measures so that, after a little bit of training, the students will certainly become accustomed to it and, sort of become habit. But early on, we want to make sure we're providing all the appropriate information for our staff and students. Next slide. I touched on this and I won't spend too much more time, but as I mentioned, schools look very different, and that's going to really start with the arrival and dismissal process. So I think the first thing to note is arrival. There's going to be a lot of different and number of new stations as students enter our buildings and staff. The first thing, as I mentioned previously, we're going to enforce social distancing, but there will be different stations along the way. So students before they enter will receive hand sanitizer. As I mentioned, they'll receive a mask from us if they do not have a mask of their own. And then they will go through health screening process. So all of these steps will actually happen before students and staff enter our building. I mentioned this, and this is really important for all the families on the call. I know this can be challenging and frustrating, and everyone wants to go see their child and see them, make it safely to the classroom. But really limiting the amount of people in the building is important to us. So we are going to limit the amount of visitors that enter our building. So families will have to say goodbye to their children at the door, and we'll make sure we have staff and clear guidance for students to navigate to their classroom, but families will not be allowed to enter the facilities. Next slide. And I mentioned this just briefly on the last slide, but staff and students will be required to participate in a daily health screening based on DC Health questions. If we're hoping that you all will help support this. I think if we all treat this as a communal effort, we can help to limit the spread. So a lot of this will start at home. We're working with your students. If they're sick, we're going to encourage you to keep them home. But there's going to be a series of questions that we're going to ask you to work with us on, but also we'll reinforce with observations in school. But if we do have students or staff members that display any signs of COVID-19 symptoms, we will be designating a location per building, multiple locations if needed, where students and staff will be isolated from the rest of the population. And if a student is taken there, we'll reach out to the guardian and follow all DC Health protocols. But again, we want to try to limit the amount of interactions with potentially positive cases. So those students will be isolated in a very respectful way. But again, limiting the amount of interactions with potentially positive cases is important to us. But we will notify guardians as soon as that process happens. But there will be a designated space in our buildings for students to go to if that happens. Next slide. So meal service, I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do over the past few months. Meals are an important part of the day, and making sure that our students receive good and nutritious meals is one of the most important things we do on a daily basis, and that's going to continue. We're committed to making sure students and staff and students have access to high quality meals, but again, like everything else, it's going to look very different this upcoming school year if we do come back in person. The biggest thing is we want to limit, like I said, limit mixing of cohorts and limit any large group gatherings. Because of that, the cohort is going to remain together. So that group of 12 students will remain together, and meals will be provided in classrooms, and students will be eating in that small group, typically in the classroom. So for lunch, meals will be delivered to the classroom. For breakfast, one of the key arrival process steps will be setting up a grab-and-go breakfast table. So after students pass the different cleaning or different hand sanitizer and symptom check steps, they will grab a meal and take it to the classroom. So breakfast will be in the classroom as well. Next slide. So we know all of this is going to be new and different for everyone, including you, your students, but also staff. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to reinforce this guidance and train our staff. I mentioned we just issued some draft guidance for school leaders to look over. It's a really robust document that walks through all this, but there's going to be a lot of training opportunities for staff to understand these new protocols and really make sure we're enforcing in a way that the students understand and can learn from and understand why we're doing all of these things. But we'll make sure all the training is necessary for staff. We're going to make sure that all the schools have what they need to be successful. All of these things are going to be new. So we've been working closely with city partners to go through a procurement exercise to make sure all of the safeguards in place and all of the things we need to stand this up are ready and at schools for day one. So that includes PPE, signage, any sort of new step throughout the way. We'll make sure that staff have what they need to be successful. Next slide. And then the last slide, we'll end. The Chancellor mentioned this during the press conference last week, but we're all committed to ensuring that there is an opportunity or an option for families to go through a virtual only option. So we will be offering all virtual instruction for all families that prefer that learning at home model. So we walked through some of the in classroom thinking, but if it is more comfortable for your family to choose an all virtual option, that will be there for you as an option to think through. So I know I went through a lot, and quite frankly, it's tough to boil all this down into a few slides. So I'm sure I didn't touch on everything. So I'm happy to take a few questions. I think Shanita, you were gonna pull a few out.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. The team has been culling through questions that have been coming through and lifted up the top 3 frequently asked questions that are coming through on the operations side. So I'll start with the first one. When and where will students receive masks? It seems impractical and unsafe to give them to students at the door of the school or upon entering a school bus.
Yeah, I mean, well, that is our current thing. We're hoping, that you all are wearing masks in your everyday life. But before we enter our buildings, we want that to be really one of the first steps. The first step, based on health guidance, is actually going through hand sanitizer. So when students are putting on masks, they're doing so with clean hands. But it'll be outside of the building. There'll be a station set up with a table with age-appropriate masks. And that'll be staffed by the school, where students approach and a staff member hands the student a new mask per day, and that's done outside of the building. Again, really reinforcing that we want all of these health steps to happen before anyone enters our building. We want our schools to be very healthy and safe places. So we want all the steps, when possible, to happen outside of the school doors.
Thank you. The next question for you, Patrick, is around HVAC. Has each classroom been evaluated for ventilation? In our school, we have classrooms where windows cannot be opened and a faulty HVAC system. What is going to happen in these cases?
Yep, so we've started that with our partners at DGS. We are doing building level, building specific evaluations. You're right. I mean, there are a lot of what I call flavors of HVAC systems across our buildings. Some of our recently modernized schools have some new technology that allows fresh air to come through the systems through a direct outdoor air system. Some of our schools have part of the buildings that have that direct outdoor air system, and some of our schools don't have that. So based on the ASHRAE guidance, they actually break down different recommendations depending on what the building type is and where you fit in sort of a system level evaluation. So we're not making a one-size-fits-all recommendation. There's actually building level recommendations depending on existing systems. So there's different techniques that we're going to do. One is just shifting and modifying the controls on existing systems. If schools don't have outdoor air systems, there are things like mobile HEPA filters, which we will be bringing into classrooms, which is a way to help clean the air without a ventilation system. So we're following all of the ASHRAE recommendations that have been posted. It's really it's a body that is just well respected in the industry and sort of a leader on what healthy buildings look like, and we're following that guidance.
Great, thanks again. So the last question that I'll share for you, Patrick, is about teachers being trained on health protocols before reopening. Will they get PPE? Who will be responsible for the cleanliness of the classrooms on deep clean days?
Yep, so all staff will receive PPE, and a baseline is just a mask per day, but there's going to be additional enhanced PPE for certain staff members. So if you are potentially in contact with a potential positive, there will be additional PPE like a face shield and gown and gloves and shoe covers and things like that. Yeah, so all staff will receive PPE. One of the key things we're going to be working with school leaders on is really making sure all these protocols are in place. And the pre-service week is a really good chance for us to reinforce these and train a lot of staff members. From a cleaning standpoint, we've got really strong and good custodial teams that will lead a lot of the cleaning. If additional cleaning crews are needed, which at this point we don't think is necessary, but if additional cleaning crews are needed, we do have the ability to bring in contracted cleaners. But as you'll see during the schedule, when Corey presents a few slides, there is a dedicated day throughout the week where our custodians will essentially have the building to themselves and we'll be providing the deep cleaning. And that's based, and we're providing additional guidance to them based on CDC and DC health guidance. So all of the cleaning guidance is again grounded and based in the health professional guidance.
Thanks, Patrick. We're going to shift here to our next speaker. As you mentioned, Patrick, it's a lot of information. And so we will be sharing this deck following the town hall, in addition to we are recording. And so we'll be able to share with you a recorded version, and you can take a look at this in more detail at that point. So right now I'm going to shift over to Corey Colgan, who is our Chief of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And she's going to share now more about our learning options. And so I'm going to hand it over to Corey. I'll preview now that she might have some Wi-Fi issues. She's been having some Wi-Fi issues today. So I'll jump in if we lose her.
Thank you so much, Shanita. And good evening, everyone. I sincerely hope that my Wi-Fi does cooperate. I apologize that I'm having a rough day with that today. Maybe some of you can relate. So as Shanita said, my name is Corey Colgan. I lead the Office of Teaching and Learning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our instructional models and what we anticipate instruction looking like in the coming year. Also want to name, as Shanita did, that I am also a DCPS parent. I have 3 students, a rising middle schooler, an 8th grader, and a 3rd grader in the system. And so like you, I am wrestling with the challenges of working full time and thinking about what are the best choices for my students and trying to support my students' learning at home. So I want to start by saying that, as I think everyone is well aware at this point, we are, in order to be fully prepared for whatever the next school year may bring, we want to have full plans for both hybrid instruction, which would be a mix between in-person and learning at home, and all virtual instruction. And one of the key goals of our planning is to ensure that we set things up in a way that we can be as flexible as possible, so that should we begin in one setting, begin in all virtual and then move to hybrid, that we would make that as seamless as possible. Or if we begin in hybrid and we move to all virtual, or an individual school moves to all virtual, that we would have things set up as much as possible so that that would not be, or that would be as seamless as possible. One of the ways that we are doing that is to coordinate and organize all of our curriculum and learning through a learning management system. And that system is called Canvas. Some of you may be familiar with it. Our secondary students have had more experience with Canvas, but we have successfully been using Canvas for years in the district. But in preparation for next year, we have been spending this summer, we've been working with 180 plus teachers to take our existing curriculum and build it out into this digital learning management system. And that will just make it easier for teachers, students, and family members who are supporting students to understand, what is the curriculum, what is expected of students. It has a calendar view that shows upcoming assignments. When teachers schedule live meetings for their classes, those links for the live meetings can be embedded right into the calendar view in Canvas. Students submit their work in Canvas, teachers can grade it and provide feedback, both in writing or even with little audio clips for our younger students, all within Canvas. So having a full learning management system will do a lot of things that should make things easier for us at home in the fall, whether we're in a hybrid or a virtual system. As you can see, this is one of the models that we have been talking about for our pre-K through 5 and for K-8 campuses, or pre-K through 8 campuses. This would include the middle school students at that campus as well. So you can see here we have both a hybrid version, which as Patrick mentioned, all of the different constraints we would have to keep safety first. We would have smaller cohorts of students attending school, and in this model they would come 2 days a week and then be learning at home for the other 3 days. We also, of course, have the all virtual option. A couple of key points to make about this model is that on Wednesday, we would have no students or staff in the school, or teaching staff in the school, and that would be an opportunity for that deep cleaning, which Patrick was talking about. When students are at home, we have heard feedback from parents that live interaction with teachers is really important in building those connections and ensuring students are engaged in the learning. So we will have opportunities for live interaction. We will have a mix of synchronous or live interaction and asynchronous or self-directed learning over the course of the week. I also want to note that special education and English learner supports will be available in both options. So no matter which option a student with an IEP may choose, we will ensure that they have the supports that they need. Lastly, I want to say that we are exploring the idea of the possibility of having sites for those families who most need it, to have the opportunity to have a what we're calling a virtual learning hub, a place where if the family needs support in supervision of the child on a learning at home day, that may be a possibility. That's something that we're working on, and the city leadership is also working on as well. So we can move to the next slide in 612, sorry, okay, right here. In 612, we are also looking at a hybrid model, because typically in 612 our students travel to see many different teachers. They have content specific teachers. We are looking at a 1 day a week option for in-person for hybrid. And on that day, students would work with an advisor, and they would be given academic support, social emotional development, and have an opportunity potentially to work on projects or longer term work and things, additional supports that schools provide, like college and career preparation and that sort of work. The majority of the courses would actually be delivered virtually for all students in this model, whether they choose hybrid or all virtual. And this just allows us the flexibility in scheduling to make sure that all of our students can take the content courses that they need, and particularly for high school students, to make sure they have full access to all the different graduation requirements that they may need. In both the elementary model and the secondary model, attendance will be taken daily. We do expect students to attend to their learning each day, and it will be a mix of live lessons, asynchronous or recorded lesson and learning opportunities, blended learning programs, and independent study. Similar to the elementary model, in this case, schools will have the opportunity for deep cleaning on that Wednesday, and all of the safety protocols that Patrick talked about would really be driving the experience in the school building should we go with the hybrid model. Next slide. I just want to also touch upon the third principle that the Chancellor spoke to at the beginning of tonight's meeting, which is promoting equity. And so in alignment with our equity framework, we want to ensure that we are, to the extent possible, meeting the needs of our individual students. So we want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to learn from a supportive teacher and have that live interaction, as I spoke about. We want to make sure that all students have access to rigorous and joyful learning opportunities. So whether they're in person or virtual, we're really trying to make sure that we have an equitable experience and that students are getting the additional supports that they need, so that teachers have the opportunity to do targeted small group instruction, some individual support, that they have the opportunity to have data on how students are progressing and can really meet students' needs. We want to note that in the hybrid models, there's a possibility that we may not be able to meet the demand, that it depends on the staffing capacity of schools. And so if that were the case, we would really want to prioritize the students who show the highest need and support them in that in-person environment. And then lastly, and you'll hear more about this from my colleague Colin in just a moment, it is critical that all of our students have access to the technology that they need to really fully engage in the learning when they're at home. So I am going to pause there and see if, Shanita, you have any questions for me from the group? Yep,
I have a few questions. The first one that I'll tee up for you has been one that we've heard a lot about, and so this won't come as a surprise. Why isn't there an all virtual option for pre-K3 and pre-K4? I understand the challenges, but would love to see one. If you could just share a little bit about around our thinking currently around that.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, so initially I think we're really concerned about the challenges of being able to provide a virtual option for students that young. There are some challenges with learning online, and of course would always prefer that opportunity to play and interact in person with peers and with the teachers. But we have heard loudly and clearly, especially in recent days and weeks, that this is really important to families, and that an all virtual option for pre-K3 and 4 students should be something that is on the table. And so we are actually working very hard right now to look into the feasibility of that and what would that look like. And so it is definitely something that we are exploring, and we should be able to make a final decision and share more about that soon.
Thanks, Corey. So the next question that's coming up a lot is, what options are being considered for special education kids who may not be able to do any kind of meaningful distance learning?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, it is possible that some students may be prioritized for more in-person learning, so long as the health conditions allow us to do that. So we are looking at potential schedules for students with IEPs who are particularly those who are in self-contained classrooms that again, staffing will also drive this, or any staffing constraints may drive this, but our goal is to prioritize that they may be in school for at least 2 days a week to promote that in-person learning for them.
Great, thank you. I'm going to now transition over to Colin Taylor, who's our Chief of the Office of Data and Strategy, so that he can share more around how we're thinking about, again, that equity of access principle and value around technology for our students.
Thank you, Shanita. And as Corey noted, I just want to say as a parent, we know how important it is that students can connect with their teacher. So to that end, we're going to share a couple things, a couple updates with you all this evening. So number one, we are committed to ensuring students who do not have access to devices at home have one for learning. In addition, we also know it's important to make sure families and staff know how to navigate the different platforms for virtual learning. So we're providing training to increase fluency on the use of virtual learning platforms. And then finally, we're really excited to share that we are expanding technical support in two important ways in partnership with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, OCTO. So number one, we are going to be offering a family-facing call center for issues for DCPS families, for issues related to devices, to logins, to passwords, all of those types of issues that we know you all experienced during the spring, during virtual learning. We have a lot of lessons learned there, and we are applying that knowledge to how we're approaching the build out of this family-facing call center. So the idea for that is that there would be direct technical support so that families can contact someone over the phone and get answers to their questions directly rather than having to go through different layers of support. In addition, we're going to be increasing the technical support available for schools and staff. We think it's really important in this time that our staff are also well supported, and we know that they were also had to grapple with a number of issues as we quickly pivoted to distance learning this spring. Next slide, please. So we just want to note here, many of you are familiar with the mayor's multi-year commitment to closing the digital divide called the Empowered Learners Initiative. And as we look to the upcoming school year, DCPS is going to leverage the devices that we purchased last year in the 1920 school year to support virtual or hybrid instruction for students who lack a device at home, as well as our additional investments for the upcoming year to ensure, again, that all students who need a device or internet will have access to that. Next slide, please. And then related to that, something we're really excited to share is that for any new devices that we're purchasing for the upcoming year, we are shifting to data-enabled or LTE-enabled devices. So this is like a cell phone. Students won't need to have a separate hotspot or a wireless connection to be able to connect to the internet. And so we're really excited to be able to put those two solutions into one device so that students who lack access at home can more easily manage the experience. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we just want to share a little bit of information on how we are assessing needs. So in terms of measuring need for devices, we are releasing, or we have released today, a survey to all families to share each student's technology needs. And so this survey asks about whether students have access to a device, the type of device, whether their access is dedicated or shared. And we also collected a lot of information. Our schools collected a lot of great information this spring. And so we want to rely both on the data we've already collected and the data for the new school year as we plan to make sure schools are able to support student needs for the upcoming year. So please take this survey and share it with your fellow DCPS parents. so that we can make sure we have a sense of the needs across the district. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Shanita.
Thanks, Colin. We have a little bit of time now, so we wanted to raise back up a few other questions and ask for our Chancellor to respond to a few of them, as well as might make sense for our other panelists to chime in as well. The first question has come up in the chat after we just shared sort of how we're thinking about pre-K. It asks, so is that a change that pre-K will have an all virtual option? And so I wanted the Chancellor to be able to chime in and speak to that a little more.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Burney, for raising that question back up. DCPS is currently exploring age-appropriate supports for our youngest learners in our early childhood education programs that support our 3-year and 4-year-olds. That could be the development of a virtual option. It could be some other ways that we could support students and their families. So look for additional information in the coming days as we finalize our strategy for how to best support our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds.
Thank you, Chancellor. Another question I think might be good for you to answer is, I would like to know, about innovative solutions that DCPS is considering for in-person learning, such as outdoor classrooms.
Yeah, so we are not opposed to outdoor instruction. In fact, we want to maximize the learning space on our campuses. Obviously, that looks different by campus. As Chief Davis referenced earlier, we've done an analysis on each campus that is unique to their various structures and needs. And so where we have the space, we'll be encouraging staff and schools to maximize indoor and outdoor space and reimagine the use of the campus that allows us to maximize learning, but also keep our students and staff healthy and safe.
Great, thank you. Another question I want to lift up, and this might be best for Colin to answer. Can families switch between this might be best for Corey to answer. Can families switch between virtual and hybrid during the year if they want to?
So, Ms. Burney, I'll be happy to respond to that.
Okay, great, thank you.
So it is much easier for families to transition from hybrid to all virtual. It is more challenging for a family that would want to switch from all virtual to hybrid. And so for the families that would make a choice for hybrid instruction, we would ask that they make a commitment to that model for a period of time. However, if a family is hybrid and want to transition to all virtual, we would be much more flexible and would allow for that more frequently.
Awesome. So let's keep going with some more questions. Exercise is critical for children, both for their health and for their learning abilities. How will PE be conducted?
We still want to ensure that our students are experiencing all of their core and encore areas that they would experience in a traditional setting. So we want to ensure that the arts are embedded in the instructional day as much as possible. Physical education, as mentioned earlier, it's ideal for us to utilize as much outdoor space as possible. And so I could see us maximizing our outdoor space with physical education and movement. And we would also want to ensure that students get appropriate time outside as well for recess and just ensuring that they're keeping their bodies healthy and moving around throughout the day. So we'll work with schools on scheduling that appropriately, but we expect that to be a part of the learning experience when we have in-person learning.
Great. Chancellor, can you share a little bit more about how we're thinking about after school for these two different models?
So for the hybrid approach, we have gotten clear guidance from DC Health that we can provide after school care. However, students would need to be in cohorts for after school care to minimize cohort mixing, we would ensure that we would have adults assigned to a group of students for after-school care. And we would also keep the numbers at the appropriate ratio to have successful social distancing. And we're currently working with our partners that provide after-school care to ensure that those guidelines are clear for them as well as they plan for implementation.
And also, what happens if a child or teacher gets COVID and has been at school?
So if a student is in a particular cohort and there's an infection or a child is sick, we would communicate with families impacted directly in that cohort. And then we would also have school-wide communications when appropriate as well.
And Chancellor, is that the same for teachers?
So if a teacher has been in close contact with a cohort and the teacher is serving, for example, cohort A, we would communicate directly with those families in cohort A. And then anytime there is any type of infection within the building, there would be appropriate wide-scale general communication to the entire student population and families.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to close with one more question, just given our time. How will you make online learning more joyful?
So we learned a lot last year in the feedback we received from the spring, and we've had many more days and weeks to plan for a different experience. So part of this is the work that our curriculum team has done over the summer to convert many of our standards of learning and curriculum materials into easy to use in a hybrid format. And so what this will allow our teachers to do is take some of our curriculum and embed creative activities for students to incorporate in their learning at home, which could be taking some of the things that are often found in the house, or providing students the opportunity to engage with their family members or outside at home. So incorporating the students' surrounding and also taking our curriculum and applying it to a learning at home posture has been a huge part of our work, and we anticipate that students will feel that in a different way, and we are excited about the engagement to come for students and also families. It's important that we want to continue to keep families engaged as well, because we know that they've supported learning at home last year. And so beginning in August, planned for the week of August 10th, we'll have more sessions for families around how to navigate our various platforms. I know Canvas was mentioned earlier. We'll be sharing more with families about Canvas. I'm a DCPS parent. I use Aspen a lot. I want to be sure that families understand Aspen and grading and attendance. So we want people to be really clear about our platforms, and then we want to take those platforms to the next level to ensure that instruction is highly engaging.
Excellent, thank you so much. We're at about time, and so we want to offer a few closing thoughts, including, if we can go to the next slide, some additional key dates that are relevant to folks that are on the call now, between now and the start of school. So again, we'll be sharing this back out with you following the town hall, or likely sometime tomorrow. And so want to make sure you have these dates and that you're aware of them, including another family town hall that's happening tomorrow, two that are happening on Monday and Tuesday, respectively, that will be conducted in Spanish and Amharic. Of course, the first day of school, no matter what school looks like, August 31st. And really exciting Reopen Strong strand for our parent university that will be launching as well in August. And so as we close out and go to the last slide, want to share with you just an image of a website that we are looking to stand up. We hope to launch it on July 31st, the same day as the mayor's update on the fall school year 2021 plan. And we want that to be a one-stop shop for folks to be able to go and get information, resources, and updates as we are posting them real time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm going to pass it over to our Chancellor to close us out. Thanks again, and we appreciate your questions and comments today.
And thank you, Ms. Bernie. Thank you to our chiefs that presented today on the panels. Hopefully, families, what you heard from us today is that we've been really thoughtful around how we reopen strong for the 2021 school year. You heard from staff members who, like me, are DCPS parents and are thinking about their perspective as a parent and thinking about you and how we best serve your children as we open the 2021 school year. One thing I want to be really clear about as we close is we are planning not only for academic success, but the complete well-being of our students. We know that this has been a traumatic time for many, and we will spend lots of time investing in our young people and their social emotional wellness as well. As a part of the curriculum, and one of the questions we asked about how will this be engaging, we plan lessons around living through history and having young people reflect on this time period and what they learned and some skills that they can build from this as they reflect on where we've been as a nation and where we're going as a nation and even their own local communities. There's so much that we have that we can build upon, and I'm excited about what all of our teams have done, and hopefully what you heard today, whether it's operations, whether it's technology, whether it's teaching or learning, it is our goal, it is our intent to ensure that whether students are learning at home or learning in school buildings, that they're getting what they need to continue to be their best and maximize their potential. And we're in this together with you families to help us get there. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate your engagement this evening. We thank you all. Have a good evening.